Good evening and welcome to Rights of a Free People, a television program brought to you by the American Civil Liberties Union of Rhode Island. We have a really great show tonight and I hope you'll join us for the half an hour that we have to talk about First Amendment issues, open government. I have three fantastic guests, so you really want to stay tuned. First, we have Ed Fitzpatrick from Roger Williams University. He's a professor, former journalist. He knows all about the First Amendment and open government. We also have Linda Levin from Access Rhode Island, who is also a former journalist. I think one of the founding members of Access Rhode Island.
Yes.
And she's very active in the legislation and making sure that we have access to the information we as people should have access to in our government. And then finally, we have Justin Silverman, who is a member of the board of the New England Foundation for the First
Close. New England First Amendment Coalition. Yes.
And I believe Ed is also a member.
I'm on the board, yep.
So, so let's jump right in. How about this year legislation affecting open government? You want to start about some of the things we should be looking for?
Well, the Access Rhode Island will be reintroducing its amendments to the Access to Public Records Act and the Open Meetings Act. We got some minor changes through on the Access to Public Records Act last year, and we're hoping to get some more to the Open Meetings Act. It's not really been amended in any significant way for something like 20 or 30 years. And a lot has changed, not the least of which is the internet, which is a great way to get information out to citizens who are interested in, say, a school committee meeting or whatever. So we've made some changes to that act that we hope will get through this year. I think the legislature is going to be busy with some other bigger issues, at least on their minds and their agenda than open government, but we hope that they'll look at our legislation. And
so let's just explain to our viewers, for people who don't know, because many people don't know, we have these two acts that exist. One's called the Access to Public Records Act, and
Right.
one's called the Open Meetings Act. So explain to the viewers what their rights are as citizens to have access to government information.
well, I can't give you all of the parts of the Access to Public Records Act. They're basically, it opens up government to the citizens. There are a lot of parts of it, aspects to it. But if you want, let's say that your neighbor was arrested, or your neighbor's house was broken into, and you want to find out what was taken, you can go to the police station, and you should be able to get access to that report about that burglary.
And then the Open Meetings Act, which is corollary to that,
Yes.
which allows citizens access
To public meetings. The school committee is one of the biggest and most important, I think, in this state meeting that citizens attend and are regularly involved in what goes on at the meetings, and they have every right to attend. The city and town councils. There are other zoning boards, for instance. There are state agencies that are open, their meetings are open to the public.
Ed?
And the ACLU had a great report just 2 years ago called Hidden Agendas about some of the Open Meetings Act issues. And part of it was like, a good example was in Burrillville, where they had an agenda for the planning board discussion that under the category of other business, and there was no real explanation. And minutes of the meeting showed that it included raising questions regarding the proposal for the power plant, which is like the biggest issue
Right.
in Burrillville ever. And so, you know, some of the bills, and there was some success in the last session, right, to make the Open Meetings Act better by saying that 48-hour notice requirement couldn't include weekends, because you had public bodies that would say, all right, on Friday afternoon, we'll tell you there's a meeting Monday. And
Posting the agenda.
Yeah, and so it said you can't include the weekends, you can't include holidays, so there's real constructive notice. So that was some good progress, but there is, Access Rhode Island is getting behind a bill this year that will be introduced soon to try to make some other improvements
Right.
to the Open Meetings Act. And, you know, just some basic things like saying like a retreat is included in the kind of meeting. You know, you just can't call it a retreat and evade the Open Meetings Act. You know, it's just some kind of nitty-gritty things that just lets people know there's going to be a public body discussing public business.
One of the problems with public bodies and meetings is that they often think that the meeting is their meeting. And they don't want to let the public in. And they want to hold secret sessions, closed sessions. And they don't want to release information that came out of a closed session, for instance. They don't understand that they work for the public and that what goes on in the meeting is the public's business. And this has been difficult, I think, for some people who are elected, particularly, I'm singling out school committees because frequently people who are elected to school committees or appointed to them have really great intentions to do wonderful things for the schools in their community, but they don't have any background in politics, and they're not really aware or sure just how the Open Meetings Act works, and they don't always want to let the public in, and it's difficult. And I think our amendments are going to help clarify things both for the committee members and also for the public.
Yeah, I would single out the fire districts. The hidden agendas report by the ACLU showed that fire districts have done a horrible job of informing the public about what's going to be on the agenda. And sometimes it's, you know, it's just so vague. You know, it's old business, new business, and you would never know what they're going to discuss. And one of my favorite examples was the Northern Rhode Island Conservation District. Just used all these acronyms so that one of the topics was SRWEP, and also later in the meeting they were going to talk about SEC, RC&D, and RIFCO. So, you know, don't even get me going on RIFCO. That's a
Do we now
divisive
know
topic.
what
No,
those-
I have no idea what that means. And, you know, no one would, so why would you show up to the meeting?
And so you look at the agenda and you think, would I want to go? Well, I don't even know what that means, so.
Yeah.
And it's particularly troublesome with fire districts because they have taxing authority.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they may be discussing raising your taxes and you don't even have adequate notice that this is going to occur. And so one of the goals of these acts is to allow people adequate notice to know when they want to attend a meeting and be heard on a subject.
Yeah, a couple points actually to add to what Linda was saying. A lot of times this secrecy occurs because people just don't know the law. You have public officials that have very good intentions and are trying to do their job well, but just don't know what their responsibilities are under the law. So anytime you can have legislation like this that's going to clarify what the law is and make it easier to understand, not just for the public officials that have to abide by it, but for public citizens that are looking for information, then that's legislation that we should all be supporting. More generally, I think it's important to note for viewers that aren't familiar with these laws that ultimately it's about government transparency, it's about government accountability, and these are principles that we should all be behind. And these types of bills that, that Linda and Ed are discussing, this is legislation that we should all be supporting because it really increases that kind of transparency and lets everyone know what their public officials are doing on their behalf.
Now, there have been difficulty through the years. You indicated that the Open Meetings Act hasn't been really retooled in maybe 30 years. What's specific to either of the Access to Public Records Act or the Open Meetings Act are we looking to either refine or change?
Well, the time element was one, obviously, and we got that through. Something like making sure that agendas are available and, as Ed pointed out, they're not full of acronyms or vague things like new business. And we also, one of the things we had in the bill that we put in last year, and I think it's still in this year, is to have a community bulletin board online so that the members of the public body could communicate with each other and communicate with the public. And so there are things that a lot of it does not, a lot of the information in the bill, a lot of the parts of the bill really need updating to include the internet. And that's one of the things that we tried to make sure. The public records less so, because public records have migrated to the internet, and that's the way you can get them now. I mean, I've made a lot of public records requests in the last few years, and they all come via the internet. But the Open Meetings Act is different. You're not looking for records necessarily. So we're looking to make the meetings more open to the public, the information more available, making sure that the minutes get to the Secretary of State's office in a timely manner, changes like that, so that the public really knows what's going on in a timely manner, which they should be able to in this day and age.
Now, I know you're very active in Access Rhode Island, and I believe the ACLU is also an active participant in Access Rhode Island.
They're one of our constituent organizations, yes.
Who else makes up Access Rhode Island?
The Common Cause, the League of Women Voters, the Rhode Island Press Association, and Justin's organization.
So they're all intertwined. And what I find remarkable about it is they're all nonpartisan. It's none of them are about getting information on a particular party or a particular person. It's just
Yeah, I think
access.
that's a good point.
Open to everybody.
Open government's going to serve both parties, either party. It's just holding whoever's in power accountable to have open, accessible government.
Yeah, I don't recall that we've ever had any kind of major discussion of any kind at our Access Board meetings on, well, do you think this Democrat will do this or that Republican will do that? It's always
Fighting for
trying to
information.
get everybody on board and wanting to be in favor of changes.
Yeah. I mean, the overall goal is government accountability, which is nonpartisan.
Exactly.
Right? So for everyone, we should all have that same goal, no matter what political side of the spectrum we're on. We should all be pushing for and advocating for government accountability, and that's what our organizations do.
Now, obviously, I've heard that your organization is a member of Access Rhode Island, but as a whole, this First Amendment coalition, what is its overreaching, broad goals?
Sure. So we are a First Amendment organization. So our mission incorporates all freedoms of the First Amendment: speech, assembly, press, petition. To get all of those freedoms protected, to defend those. But the heart of our work, and really how our organization began in 2006, was to defend public access to records and through open meeting laws. And the bulk of our work still focuses on the public record laws and open meeting laws in all the New England states, making sure that they're as strong as they can be and providing as much access as possible to the public.
And NEFAC's got its annual awards luncheon coming up on Friday. So Justin, you got to tell them about the kids. One of the great stories that they're going to give an award to Friday are some kids who you can tell the story.
It's a great story. So to back up a step, every year we have the New England First Amendment Awards. It's a luncheon where we honor various people who have defended or advocated for the First Amendment or government transparency in certain ways. And our headline honoree this year is Jane Mayer of the New Yorker. We'll also be honoring Todd Wallach, the investigative reporter at the Boston Globe. But one group that we're honoring this year is a group of teenage volunteers for a community group in a neighborhood in Boston. And they have this great story where they come from a neighborhood called Hyde Park, and they were looking to come up with the financing to build a new rec center in their neighborhood. Their current rec center wasn't being used. It needed to be either torn down or renovated, and they needed a new one, but they didn't know how to come up with the money to do so. And so they went to their community organization and decided to work with them on coming up with ways to come up with this financing. And through a tip, an advisor at the community organization was told that when the Boston Garden was being built, the owners of the garden had agreed had agreed with the state to hold 2 fundraisers every year, and the proceeds of which would go to city rec activities. The tip is that those fundraisers never occurred. So through public records requests, using the public records law, using public records and making those requests, this group of teens, we're talking 16, 17-year-old kids, found out that that was in fact the case. These fundraisers had never occurred, not one, over 20 years. And they determined that the owners of the Boston Garden owed the city upwards to $14 million, which would cover the cost of their rec center. So they're continuing this effort to try to get the owners of the garden to pay the money that they should have over the last 20 years. But the important thing to note, for our conversation is that all of this was confirmed and was pursued through public records. So without a public record law, without these sunshine laws, and every state has them, some are better than others, but without them, you don't have the ability to make requests for information and find out what agreements were made on behalf of the public, and then follow up on them and find out whether they were followed through on, and hold those accountable that haven't lived up to their end of the bargain.
That is exciting, and it's really enlightening to see young minds use information like this for their benefit. It's
a great story.
Sounds like a very deserving group of young individuals, and obviously that's something that everyone should support. I note also, because I'm an attorney, that many people don't realize that courts are open.
Right.
They're public institutions. If, even I'll be with clients and they'll be like, can I go in there? And I'm like, it's a courtroom. Of course you can go in there. It's open. And I think back to the movie of Spotlight, which was about the writers, and how a lot of the information that they got were part of a public record, and that people didn't realize and didn't appreciate that people would actually read the public record. And so if there is information about some litigation that's ongoing, they can access that information. Sometimes they can access it now online. Sometimes you might have to go to a particular, because it's public information. And you have public information at how many agencies, like you've talked about these little fiefdoms, so to speak, these little fire districts or water associations. And so it's very important for the public to know that if they're having a hard time getting access to information, they can contact the ACLU or members, other organizations that will help them get this information that they need. I know we at the ACLU have at least 3 pending lawsuits regarding public information or First Amendment rights.
Right.
One involving a police officer or
right.
firefighter who was disciplined for criticizing.
Police officer.
Yeah.
And the Pawtucket police who wouldn't give out information about an arrest. You should also note that there are corollary federal access to public records acts, if you will, and open meetings acts. And so if you wanted information from, say, the FCC or the FBI or whatever, you can make a request to them, and a lot of that information is open.
Right, those are called FOIA requests.
Right.
Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah.
And you just have to make sure you address it to the right public agency and get the name of the right entity.
Usually the federal agencies have public affairs officers who, that's what they handle. There'll be one person or maybe more if need be in the office, and that's what they handle. You can make a lot of requests now online in Rhode Island. For instance, in Providence, if you want anything from the school committee or the city council or even the police department, you can get online, and they now have portals on the city website where you can get in and make requests, and your records will come to you via the internet.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the courts, though, because here we are talking about public records and open meetings, but I feel like a lot of times in the conversation, the courts get lost, because it's important to remember that you are allowed to just go into these courtrooms, view what's happening. The courts are presumptively open, go in there as a member of the public and just hear what is happening within these rooms. One issue that our organization is working on is the inconsistent policies related to journalists covering matters that are in the courtrooms. When you can have a camera set up, for example, to record what's happening. So we're trying to make those more consistent. But all of that's just in an effort to bring what's happening within the courtroom, not the actual tangible documents, but just what the legal affairs that are occurring, to bring that to the public and make that more accessible. I think there's a lot of work to be done there as well.
We in Rhode Island can't have cameras in the courtroom. There's a law that allows them. It's rather carefully delineated on when you can actually turn the camera on and what you can use it for, but you can have them. But the federal courts, the U.S. Supreme Court still won't allow cameras in. And I'm not sure about some of the lower federal courts.
I don't think they can. I spent 5 or 6 years covering the courts, federal and state courts, and yeah, I haven't seen cameras in federal courts, but the Chief Judge Smith and the federal judges in Rhode Island have been very good about allowing more advanced technology in social media. You can tweet from the courtroom, and they have Twitter accounts, and the access to online information about the court documents through PACER is making progress, and on the state level too. So you're starting to see them catch up with the technology.
Yeah, that being said, one issue that does remain in Rhode Island courtrooms is that it's to the judge's discretion whether or not a camera can be set up, and many judges will allow it, and that's great, and it's bringing the public into if maybe perhaps virtually into the room to see what's happening in court. But if a judge does not want to allow a camera, that judge can forbid them without any reasoning or without any notice.
They've been pretty good about cameras in the courtroom around here, although at one time television stations would routinely on the evening news, if there was some big case out there and the camera had been running in the courtroom, they would use excerpts from the courtroom from that day on the newscast. You never see that anymore. It's almost as if they don't care.
Yeah, I think some of that has to do with like cutbacks at local stations.
Yes, but this is just, yeah, maybe.
And I recall, because I am an attorney, that like the judges also have discretion to prohibit you from taking notes. So if you're not an attorney or the media, so someone from the general public could be prohibited from actually taking notes, which seems.
The goal should be to learn what's happening within our courts. As a member of the public, you want to know. You want to know who's being in the court, what the hearings are all about. You want to know what's happening within your judicial system. So we should be going to great pains to avoid like any limitations on taking notes, taking video, tweeting, whatever whatever communication we choose. We should really be allowing that as much as possible.
I would commend the public, if they're having issues getting access to information, to contact one of these organizations or the ACLU and find out, first of all, whether or not people believe that they are entitled to this information, and if not, why. Or maybe we need to change the law to give them better access, or if they are, to provide an advocate for them to get this information. It's so important as a bedrock of our democracy to have access to understand how our government is acting on our behalf and making sure it's open to the public. That's why it's the First Amendment,
No, I heard someone say recently, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, that we often don't get the information we need because we simply stop demanding it. We have to continue to ask and demand for this information and be persistent and relentless until we actually get it.
Yeah, March 12th through the 18th is Sunshine Week. I always get excited this time of year. And it's something that was started by the American Society of News Editors. But
No, Society of Professional Journalists.
And they work now with the Committee for Freedom of the Press on it. And their point about it is freedom of information isn't just for the press. It's for the public, and this is a good time to focus on that. And if you get the knee-jerk no at the courthouse or the state house or city hall, to come to groups like this that'll help you fight for it.
Yeah, and I want to commend the three of you for doing the public's work for us, because if we didn't have advocates like you out there making it possible, it would be more difficult. And for shedding the light, the sunshine on the fact that there are obstacles, but there are ways that we can get, hopefully, to the heart of this information. Especially if you're out there and you've been trying to get information or been denied access to a public meeting, please feel free to contact any of these organizations or the ACLU. We'll put you in contact with the people you need, and we'll fight for the rights of the public. I mean, I've done a number of First Amendment cases, and they're the ones that you, as an attorney, you dream about doing, because you really feel like you're making a difference in the overall scheme of things. For example, we had a woman who was sued for speaking out against a landfill, and she was petitioning her government, and I fought for her to get punitive damages against the people who sought to penalize her. So
How'd it turn out?
very well. Very well.
Good.
And she ended up winning the Penn Newman Award for First Amendment rights.
Good.
And she got to meet Paul Newman back in the
Yeah.
day, because the Penn Newman Award, Newman was Paul Newman. So it was very, very exciting. That was Nancy Sue Fleming.
Okay.
And so, yeah, back in the day. So I want to thank everybody. We're running out of time. We had a really exciting discussion today, but I would commend the public to contact the ACLU for more information about what their rights are to access to public records and to open meetings, or to any of these member organizations like Access Rhode Island and the
New England First Amendment Coalition, NEFAC.org.
And if you want to take a class, go to the Roger Williams University and see Ed Fitzgerald.
The University of Rhode Island
Fitzpatrick.
teaches this too.
And Common Cause
Have to
Rhode
get
Island
that
too
in.
does a lot of this work, yeah.
Definitely.
But join us again, and we'll be talking more about the First Amendment on another show, or whatever topics. You can also call in and suggest topics to the ACLU, and we'd be happy to discuss them on an upcoming event. Thank you.